All right, so this is the week 3 recap video. So I'm really reviewing week 2, and I want to get to some of the essential points and counterpoints that you guys made in these videos. So I'll go to the 3 main discussion boards and really talk about the essentials there. So the You're Not Special video. I used that video to raise a number of points. One was a question about the video itself. One was a question about is your generation egotistic? One was a question about the use of social media with your generation. So in terms of the video, it's important to notice that he is criticizing a certain way of being special. He's not saying being special is wrong no matter what, in all cases, in all instances. And there were some posts that really implied that that's what he was saying. He's not saying that merely by feeling special, you're wrong. The problem is a certain way of feeling special, for a certain way of viewing yourself as being special. And the way that it's wrong, according to him, is when you view yourself as the center of the world, when you view yourself as therefore superior to all others. Because if you are the center of the world, then you must be more important than everyone else. And he uses some great lines in the video to really express his disagreement. He says, for example, go to the top of the mountain, not so the world can see you, but so that you can see the world. In other words, don't go looking for glory and attention. Do things to really engage with the world. He also says the Earth is not the center of the solar system. Our solar system is not the center of a galaxy. And there is no center of the universe, astrophysicists have assured us. And so in other words, the idea that you're at the center of something, the idea that everything revolves around you, is just silly when you kind of look at it in a broader perspective. And why is he criticizing this? Why is he saying it's so bad? When the world revolves around you, you look at the world and in all your experiences in it, and you're thinking to yourself, what do I get out of it? And a number of you noticed this and critiqued this, and essentially agreed with the point that Dr. McCullough was making. You said you noticed that so many people in your generation think about, well, what am I going to get out of this? What's the reward? What's in it for me? A perfect example of this, and a number of you brought this up, is the idea of a college application. That people do things simply because they want to get it on their college resume. And almost universally, you agreed with McCullough that this is wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, it's wrong because it cheapens the experience. Essentially everything just becomes about you. You calculate whether or not it's worth it for you to help this person or to engage in this activity or to do X, Y, and Z. So it's always kind of relating back to you. And so you can never genuinely encounter the world, engage with the world. You're always thinking to yourself, is this world or is this experience that I'm going to be a part of useful to me? And if it doesn't pass that barrier, if it doesn't pass that test, well, then you kind of ignore it or you get rid of it. You don't participate in it. Another kind of big problem here is that you no longer do something that you're just genuinely passionate about. You no longer do things because they're simply worthwhile and good to do. Again, because it always comes back to, well, I may love to do this, but is it useful to me for some other goal? Am I going to get into a good college because of it? And when you lose this idea and this tendency to do things because they're fundamentally worthwhile and because you're passionate about it, you're less engaged in the world, you're less satisfied, you have a less fulfilling experience. And we also, and you guys also talked about this, we artificially elevate ourselves. And McCullough says, well, how do we do this? Well, we give out trophies to everybody. The trophy is, everybody gets a trophy mindset. We call things, upper level when they're really not. We make you feel like you're an honor student, maybe when you wouldn't have been that in the past. And you guys also noticed this as well. And a number of you critiqued that everybody gets a trophy mindset. And so what he's doing is he's encouraging you to look at the bigger picture. When you look at the bigger picture, you realize these artificial elevations of yourself above others are just that, artificial. In reality, even if you're 1 in a million on a planet of 6.8 billion, there's 6,800 people just like you, even if you're 1 in a million. And so that's extraordinary. He says if you think you're the smartest because you're the valedictorian, there's a whole bunch of valedictorians. If you think you're a great, you're a great athlete because you're the superstar on the high school team, there's a whole bunch of great athletes. And so again, looking at the bigger picture, you realize that these prompts, that these tools, that these props that we use to make ourselves feel like the center of the world are exactly that. They're artificial. And this is important too. And this is something that a few of you got slightly wrong, and it's easy to see why, because it's a nuance. What he's saying here is essentially, look, not everybody is equal in all regards. There's some people that are better athletes, better looking, better teachers, better communicators, better politicians, better artists. And he says that's the reality. And so don't think everybody's kind of just exactly equal. But by the same token, don't think you're so superior to others. Because again, when you take that bigger picture look, ultimately and likely you're not. But he isn't saying that being special is wrong in all regards. Being special means that you have a fundamental dignity that's attached not to what you do, but to who you are. And what being special means is living a life that is special. And a life that is special is one where you're engaged in the world, where you're happy and you're satisfied. And the only way to do that is to give yourself to what you're passionate to. Recognize that there are things more important than your own kind of individual desires and egos, and engage in the world. All right, I want to talk about the social media. The overwhelming majority of you, in fact, I'm not sure I found one post that kind of directly supported the idea of social media. Pretty much everyone said social media leads to narcissism. Social media contributes to this attitude that the world revolves around me. Again, that was pretty much universal. And so here, social media, it doesn't lead you out of yourself into the world. What you guys were saying is it really puts people back into themselves. It refocuses people on themselves. It makes people think more about them than anything else. And you guys gave some great examples. The idea that, look, people are focused on the number of followers that they have, they're obsessed with this almost, and that they'll delete things and pictures and posts if they don't get more than, let's say, 25 likes. So people are very cognizant of who is following me, what are they saying, are they giving me praise? And you also, a number of you mentioned that social media can be a mechanism to make yourself feel better about yourself. And this makes sense when you tie it to what David McCullough was saying in that graduation video. He essentially says, look, why do we need to feel like we're the center of the world? Why is that so important to us? Well, ultimately we fear death. And we fear death because we fear being insignificant, being nothing, not being important. And that is a dread. That is something that is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I think you guys picked up on this in your posts. Because essentially you're saying, look, if people don't feel like they're significant enough, if they aren't shown enough attention, then they'll just simply delete that part of their lives and they'll get upset about it. Because the world didn't pay enough attention to them. Interesting as well that a number of you brought up this idea that women actually are more affected by this than men. And so I just want to raise a contradictory position. And the position that, look, social media could be used to draw you out of yourself, could be used to put you in touch with the world. I mean, the idea is social. It is a social media. So in that way, it could be used to connect yourself to others. It could be a way to allow you to stay in touch with people that you haven't stayed in touch with previously, and that you may not have stayed in touch with without this media. So why not? Why doesn't it more often draw people into this community, make them feel like they're a part of something more than themselves? In that same vein, you can say, look, it brings you out of yourself into the world by allowing you to recognize what is happening in the world. Puts you in touch with big important events, whether they be events of joy or events of sadness and tragedy. For example, my sister-in-law, married, 3 kids, got brain cancer, and devastating. And she's still alive, still receiving treatments. We did some fundraisers for her, and there was just this huge outpouring of support, both kind of in terms of messages of support as well as financial. And that was all made possible by social media. People saw it and people supported it. And so the social media can be used for good. And I wonder why it's not more often used for good. I wonder if some of your posts were just focusing only on the negative. Okay, another discussion board revolved around this idea of ethical universalism versus relativism. So I just want to be very brief here. Ethical universalism means some things are right and some things are wrong. Some behaviors are good, some behaviors are bad. Some characteristics, ways of being, ways of looking at the world are good. Some ways of looking at the world are bad. And a number of you I don't think you quite got this fully. Because it's not based on consensus or people agreeing. It's not based on, well, the tradition has always said this. It's not based on what is important or valued or accepted now. If you have a universal value, that means it's valid regardless of the time, regardless of the age in which you live, regardless of your tradition, regardless on whether people agree or don't agree, even if everyone agrees on a certain idea, on a certain principle. An ethical universalist would not say that it is right because of this agreement. They would say it's right, and then it happens to be the case that everyone agrees. And in this way, it is important to notice that a culture or a person can do things that contradict a universal value. A person or a culture can do things that are wrong. For an ethical universalist, if someone, for example, beats a child to death, that person or the culture that accepts it is not right, even if they think it is proper, even if they accept it. It's wrong. It's wrong, for example, to stone a woman to death because she sleeps with someone. That could be something that an ethical universalist says, and it's wrong when people do this, even if they're in culture, even if their culture has done this for a long time and a long period. So an ethical universalist recognizes, look, in reality, on very, very, very few things, maybe nothing, will all people at all times agree. But that doesn't mean that this lack of agreement is an indication there's no real values. It's simply an indication that some people are bad. Now, an ethical universalist is different than an absolutist. An absolutist says there's one way to do things, that's it, very strict, no exceptions, no deviation, nothing. An ethical universalist can accept that there is slight deviations and applications. In terms of an ethical relativism, the basic idea here, and I know a number of you got this, but a number of you also were confusing relativism and universalism. An ethical relativist says something is right or wrong based on opinion. There is nothing other than opinion. Opinion is it. That's all. There is nothing beyond it, below it. There's nothing that makes one opinion more right than another. In the end, all opinions are equal. Now, there's two forms of ethical relativism, cultural or communal relativism and individual relativism. Communal relativism essentially says, look, if a community decides something is right, it's right. If a community decides something is wrong, it's wrong. And so, for example, if a community decides it's okay to stone a woman to death or to beat a child to death, then that community is no better and no worse than a community which would refuse this. And individual relativism simply means that individuals decide what's right and wrong, and no individual opinion is more right or wrong than another. So, for example, if I would fail students because of the color of their skin, I would be no more right or wrong than some teacher who refused to do that and treated all students' work just purely based on whether it was good or bad work. All right. There was one post which is interesting, and this person said, well, ethics comes from God. And God is a tough one because if you say something is right simply because God says it's right, then that could be a form of relativism in the sense that if something is right simply because somebody says it or an authority declares it to be right, well, then that is a relativistic. It's right just because this person, in their opinion, thinks it's right. On the other hand, you might say, no, this is different with God because God is the ruler of the universe. God is the creator of morality. And so if God thinks something is right, then it is right. It's not just an opinion. It's what all people should follow. Okay, last discussion board post, premarital sex. A number of you adopted the position, a relativistic position, the idea that everything's opinion, by saying anything goes. Whatever people want to do in terms of sex is okay. You know, it's just based on opinion. There's no restrictions. Now, if you take this position, you have to accept certain things. For example, you have to accept, well, if a 40-year-old wants to have sex with a 10-year-old, that's okay. If someone wants to rape another person, that's okay. If someone wants to sell their body, have sex to make money for drugs, that's okay. If someone wants to have sex simply to make themselves feel better about themselves, that's okay. If you want to have sex with 5, 6 different people at a time, that's okay. So for the relativistic, the anything goes position, there are no restrictions. There is no legitimate or illegitimate sex, there's just sex. Now, a number of you did put on limitations, at least basic limitations. Some of these limitations included the person has to be knowledgeable and ready, emotionally, spiritually, physically ready. Other people said, well, the sex should only occur if people are committed and in love. Other people announced that, well, at least it has to be consensual. Another person said, well, it has to be legal. Now, in these cases, essentially you're saying, look, if sex isn't based on two people being knowledgeable and ready, then it's illegitimate. It shouldn't happen. If sex isn't engaged in by people that are committed or in love, then it's not legitimate. If sex isn't consensual, well, then it's not legitimate. If sex doesn't meet the legal requirements, well, then it's not legitimate. In all these cases, it's important to notice you're not saying anything goes, you're saying it's legitimate if these other restrictions are in place. And it's interesting, a number of the posts pointed to this idea that, well, the restrictions are there essentially, ultimately, for well-being. That in a sense, you are more fulfilled. That you'll feel better about yourself. That you're engaging in better sex in a certain sense, if these restrictions are respected. And I think a number of you pointed this out. A number of you posted a kind of longing that you wish your generation adopted some of these restrictions on sex. You wish that your generation didn't view sex as just, well, whatever goes, goes, casual hookups, one-night stands, whatever, they're fine, in fact, they're encouraged. In fact, that's the way to have sex. I know fewer and fewer of you are dating. And perhaps you view sex as a way to get in a date, get into a relationship. But there was this kind of the undercurrent in a number of posts that said, man, it's kind of like our generation has it wrong. The way we view sex isn't the way it should be viewed. But on the other hand, very, very few of you were able to say, well, this is definitely wrong. And in general, most of you had a hard time saying that people who have sex in a way that contradicts these basic restrictions are wrong. And this goes back to the relativist idea that everything's opinion. And in your generation in general, there is this sense, well, it's all just opinion, so even though I feel it's wrong, I can't say it. But I would encourage you to maybe reconsider that view. Perhaps there are some forms of sexuality that are destructive, that are harmful, that are not fulfilling. And what's the problem with saying those forms of sexuality are wrong? They shouldn't occur. And perhaps by saying that, you can change a person or two with regard to their attitude about sex. And perhaps if enough people do it, things change. Okay, so that is a recap of the discussion boards, and I'll move on to another video.